Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the Chicago Humanities Festival for having me here. And I also I can't see you in the dark, but I just need to do a little shout out to my family members in the audience. So hi, family. Wherever you are, I can hear you, maybe over there. This is a little bit different than the talks that I normally give. I'm splitting it into two parts. So part one, I will spend half the time talking about my practice and work with you, and then part two will be an interactive workshop where I'll explain a little bit more about data visualization, and then using the pens, the markers, and the paper that you have, that hopefully all of you took, so you all have to draw, you'll have a chance to try out data visualization on your own. Okay, so yeah, on to the talking. So yeah, I'm Stefanie, and as said, I am a designer who likes to work with data, and I create data-driven designs for both art commissions and commercial work, ranging from information design to creating physical objects, animations, and public installations using data. So, okay, so for anyone who's unfamiliar with what I mean when I talk about data, to put it simply, I'm using the stuff of spreadsheets, rows, columns, numbers, categories, and so on, as the raw material for the creative projects that I undertake. And data, it's also the stuff of big data stored in servers, the data created through your social media presence, your purchases online, your web searches, phone calls, GPS tracking from your phone, and so on. But that, I mean, is basically a whole other talk. So I'm really just going to be focusing on the graphic side of things, working with data. And I work with data, but instead of the sort of visual responses and bar charts, pie charts, and other sorts of charts that you see on screen or that you might find in Microsoft Excel or other spreadsheet programs, I also work with data in different ways, such as this piece in the Olympic Park in East London, made using slightly chaotic data that school children collected from the park, not for a statistical insight, but to inform the design of a new data-driven park landscape. Or like this collection of 1,000 small drawings on index cards that visualize data from 1,000 frequently used English words, not to draw statistical insight, but instead to highlight the beautiful variation in the English language and displayed at a British Council pavilion at a book fair in Mexico. Or finally, like this mural for Facebook's London campus, where to communicate the attractive quality of a powerful Facebook post, which all of this is loaded now that everything's happened. But anyway, I had a great time painting the mural. I loosely visualized data from a very long post on my timeline in order to inform the design of a mural in their Euston Road offices in London. And now, admittedly, this is a really different way of producing work as a designer or artist. So how did I end up here? So two early influences have led me to this point. And the first big influence is from when I was young and my dad, who's in the audience, would take me to a Colorado Rockies game in downtown Denver and hand me a clipboard, a mechanical pencil, and a paper scorecard, and I'd help him score the baseball game. And if anyone wants to cheer, has anyone scored a baseball game? Woo-woo, okay, a few of you. So I thought that maybe, I haven't been to a baseball game in ages, but scoring a baseball game, I think, is kind of a dying art. Well, so I've read. But if you haven't ever given it a try, this is how it works. A scorecard's double-sided with one team on each side, with the innings across the top and the players in batting order down the side, and using a set of cryptic abbreviations and notations, you notate each play as it happens in the game. And once the game is over, the resulting symbols and abbreviations effectively become a souvenir of the game you can always refer back to, where every play in the game has been frozen and preserved in between two sides of paper. And so this is just an example of one of my dad's scorecards up on screen. And for some reason, this act of filling in baseball scorecards stayed with me and greatly influenced my creative practice, probably because it was my first experience gathering and effectively visualizing data. So this is the, Sorry. This is my second early influence, is sentence diagramming. So how many of you have ever done that in an English class? Woo! Okay, I know, cheer for sentence diagramming. I never thought you'd hear that. So yeah, sentence diagramming, for those who haven't done it, is where you carefully create diagrams of the grammatical structure of a sentence on a sheet of notebook paper to show what the subject, verb, direct object, and indirect object, and so on are of the sentence, and other parts of speech and how they all fit together and so on. And again, through compressing lots of information onto a single sheet of paper, this hidden structure behind the careful selection and combination of words by an author is made visible. And so this also influenced me because it was the beginning of a love of grammar and literature, and it was my first experience of taking something hidden, the hidden structure of a sentence, and making it visible, visualizing it so someone can see this pattern. And just as a little digression, the sentence diagram that you saw in the background is a close-up of a later project of mine where I created a sentence diagram of the longest sentence in James Joyce's Ulysses. So that's the sentence that's on screen. It's 4,000-ish words long. And then it's quite faint here, but I converted the whole thing into a very complex sentence diagram all by hand. And this is what it looks like when I hung it up in my old studio. So it's about 8 by 4 feet in size. So I know a lot about sentence diagramming. And so that's just a little digression over. But back to the story at hand. So that was my youth. But later at the age of 22, I moved to London for an MA in communication design from Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design. And it was here that my early experiences with baseball scoring and sentence diagramming manifested themselves in a project that I called Writing Without Words, where I gathered data from On the Road by Jack Kerouac and then explored ways of visualizing this data to show the hidden patterns and structure of a text. And this early project influenced my practice in many ways, as it was 11 years ago, and I couldn't access a digital version of the text, and so I had to gather all of the data from the book by hand, highlighting and marking the pages like what you see on screen. And now, if I did this project again today, I wouldn't do it that way. I would work with developers to help automate various processes, but this early constraint further influenced me to work with data in a very handmade way, and so you'll see its influence through some of the projects that I'll show you today. And so in this early project, I would explore different methods of visualizing text, like this piece here. It's quite faint, but I'll explain it. And it's from the series where I was visualizing the underlying structure of part 1 of On the Road, where it shows the hierarchy of the piece. So part 1 of On the Road is here, and it's represented by a tree diagram showing how there's a line that splits into chapters, which split into paragraphs, sentences, and then words, and then they're all color-coded by key themes within the text. So relating to Sal Paradise, the narrator, or Dean Moriarty, the main character. And through visualizing this data, I again felt that satisfaction that I found in baseball scoring and sentence diagramming, this of being able to press a large amount of information, an entire novel, onto a single sheet of paper. And this project also influenced another part of my practice, as this is all built by hand and kind of placed by eye through positioning everything in the design program Adobe Illustrator, as opposed to using code and algorithms to create this, as I couldn't code then and I can only barely code now. So at the time, I called this mapping, but I didn't really see myself going into data visualization, and I didn't even really know what it was. But I did know I wanted to do something with literature. And so a year out of my master's, I got what I thought was my dream job, and I became a book cover designer at Penguin in London, and I thought, like, designing Kerouac covers for them, which was great, and I thought I would stay in this job forever. But at the very same moment when I got a job here, we were going through our recent data visualization renaissance, where there was a rise in the use of diagrams and data to communicate messages to a lay audience, as opposed to only scientific or business analytic audiences. And because of this excitement and interest in data visualization, when I was working on book covers in my day job, my MA project went viral across the internet, and I had an inbox flooded with emails and freelance requests. And so I decided to go freelance and work in this growing design field, and that was 8 years ago. And so when I first started out, I was giving talks about this project, and people would ask me, what's the key insight through visualizing this data? What's the key truth revealed through this? As though I had created a scientific visualization or a piece of data journalism. And I couldn't really answer, as I had initially wanted to visualize this text in order to draw attention to its underlying structure, to its underlying complexity, to show how a piece of literature you care about is something living and breathing and alive, as shown through how I chose to visualize the data from this book in this very organic, plant-like way. And so for me, I was visualizing this data faithfully to communicate how I felt about the data, how I felt about this book emotionally. And I began to realize that much of my work fell in a different category. It wasn't quite scientific data visualization. It wasn't a newspaper information graphic, but what was it and what was I? And so this is my point of reckoning. And so I thought I'd better begin to clarify my position and how I work. And I think the closest thing I can do to describe the type of work I do is to say that I'm a designer slash illustrator slash artist, delete as appropriate, whose favorite creative material above all others is data. And in my work, this means that I often use data as a starting point to communicate messages that go beyond the insights found within the data, where my end intention is to create work or communicate a message that is often more emotive and often more subjective than what is traditionally found in a chart or a data visualization. Now, working with data as a designer was a natural fit for me, and as I think it makes sense in this day and age where we all create data in our digital world almost just by breathing, that this would be a plentiful material for designers to work with and also to critique. And I see data visualization as the design process that one can use to work with this material, a process that, as we move into the future, will be as common a method for a designer to create and communicate with as much as the golden mean, color theory, design systems, and all of the other rules of thumb and tools that designers use daily to create harmonious, structured designs. So an example of how I use data as a design material akin to pencil or ink or watercolor or clay to create imagery can be found in a commission for the exhibition Memory Palace at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where alongside 19 other designers and artists, I illustrated a story by the writer, well, a section of a story by the writer Harry Kunzru. Let's see how again, it's very delicate, but you can still see it. I'll show you a close-up. Where by mixing the processes of data gathering and traditional illustration, I created a triptych of prints that were 3 world maps telling Kunzru's story of a world pre, during, and post-apocalypse, where the aesthetic for the set of illustrations was created through a process of gathering and visualizing data relevant to key themes of the story, culminating in, itchy trigger finger, okay, culminating in 3 detailed prints in the exhibition. So for this, data is my material to inform these illustrations, and the data I used is related to the themes put forth in Kunzru's story, but it's still something that's obviously very different and with a different intent than your usual pie chart or bar chart that you might see in Excel. Okay. But besides my interest in this very particular aesthetic, achieved through working with data as a designer, my main reason for choosing to design and create with this material is that by doing so, I hope I'm able to communicate something subjective using a material that, if it's a good data set, will hopefully have honesty and integrity in it, in the hope that it will bring integrity to my message. So while a data scientist and I might work with data in different ways, this is how we have something in common. We're both looking for truth within our data set, except for we're using that truth to different ends, but I still think both ways are good and valid. And finally, seeing data visualization as a design process has challenged me to extend the visual languages designers use to work with data, and experiment with data visualization in the same way that a communication designer might normally push the limits of typography, layouts, illustrations, and so on. So through this, I aim to explore ways of presenting data that, besides being legible, are more memorable and more expressive to a layperson audience who might just be learning about data for the first time. So that might mean making data hoppable, or, well, danceable, like this project as the first data artist in residence at Facebook, where I converted a month of a couple's interactions on Facebook timelines, all with their consent, into dance steps, bringing their digital dance across timelines into a physical space. Or it might mean making data hoppable, such as my open data playground at the South Bank Centre in London, where hopscotch games, is it going to come? Oh, well. Yeah, where hopscotch games are used to highlight how open data is online for anyone to interpret and play with however they choose, even if some interpretations are more unconventional than others. And then it could mean a project that is touchable and wearable, such as this art commission I created with Miriam Quick, where we explored physical ways of communicating open air quality data from Sheffield in a memorable, experiential way for a citizen audience who might not be interested in air quality or data in general. So one part of the project presented weeks of particulate matter data as something you could touch and wear. And then the other part communicated a day of pollution levels in Sheffield through glasses that would make your vision more or less polluted and hazy, depending on the data. Okay, so that is a very quick run through a lot of my projects, where I try to visualize data to communicate subjective messages that go beyond insight, hopefully in ways that are more memorable, engaging, and accessible. But even when rendered in these more playful ways, talking about data and getting people to care about it is still a challenge. And many people still see data as boring and inaccessible. Maybe some of you in the audience feel that way. But also, when I was creating that open data playground, the hopscotches that I showed you, I asked someone who was nearby the installation if they knew what open data was. And they asked me, oh, well, what's data? And it gave me pause for thought, because I feel like this is a problem. In a world where everyone's lives are impacted by the data they often unknowingly relinquish as they move through our digital world, data that forms a tiny piece of a giant data set analyzed and authored by a few to often impact the lives of many, it's vital that everyone has basic knowledge of these giant, often not very transparent forces. And the idea of data can feel overwhelming even to me, and I've made my career from it. I definitely don't adhere to all of the data privacy advice and checks I should. I always feel like I'm only seeing the tip of the iceberg. And I think that's because for many, data feels like something far removed from their daily lives, bigger than they're able to comprehend, cold, clinical, computerized, hidden away in big blue servers like this photo of a Google data center. And if we want people to begin to care about something that will impact their lives in both wondrous and frightening ways for the foreseeable future, then I think we need to find a different approach. And I've been getting closer to understanding how to make data more accessible through this next project I'll show you. And it's a recent collaboration with the creative director of the information design agency Accurat, Georgia Lupi, and her studio is based in New York and in Milan. Now, Georgia and I met only twice in person when in 2014, we decided to collaborate. And we wanted to collaborate because we have a lot of personal and work similarities. The main one being that we both don't really code, but prefer to work with data in this very handcrafted analog way that I described earlier, which is in contrast to the often standard use of computing and algorithms as part of the data visualization process. And so we decided to challenge ourselves. Since data visualization was the language we spoke for work, we would use this language to get to know each other better, ideally in a very analog, hand-drawn way. And over a summer of emails back and forth, we decided to use our biggest constraint, that we lived on different continents, as our biggest asset. And so we came up with a project that we called Dear Data, a year of sending each other hand-drawn data postcards back and forth across the Atlantic. So starting on the 1st of September, 2014, and lasting a year, every week we collected our personal data around a shared topic to investigate aspects of ourselves and our days to then share with the other person. And then at the end of the week, we'd spend time analyzing our data, and then we would draw our visualizations and their annotations on a postcard, and then once we were finished, we would drop the postcard in our mailbox or in our post box and wait with our fingers crossed. And if all went well, the postcard would hopefully arrive at the other person's address, and then we would grab a coffee, sit down with the postcard, and read, interpret, and learn more about the other person's life. So all of the postcards, they all follow the same structure. The fronts contain no text, no explanation, just the drawn data. And then the back has, of course, the stamp and the address, but also a legend explaining how to read our drawings. So through this format, every week was an exploration of small data made very human and personal due to its inherent imperfections, where even our choices in data collection and what we chose to include and not to include functioned as a unique representation of each person. And so over the whole year, the whole project became a fragmented self-portrait sent to the other. So now, just to show briefly how the project unfolded and developed over the year, I will show a few postcards in more detail. So the week one, we started the year gathering data on how often we checked a clock for the time that week, so quite a weird data set. And then the second week, we tracked how we moved around our cities. And here on our iPhones, we turned the Moves movement tracking app on to gather this data. And this was actually the only time where we used an external app to automatically track us, as we felt we weren't really in control. And so as the weeks progressed, we mainly explored themes requiring manual data collection. So focusing on what computers can't gather, at least what they can't gather now, and trying to move beyond the usual quantified self data, like say your health apps on your phone, into something more akin to personal documentary, where the main pursuit was to use this data capture to make sense of our world, to connect and be present in our days and week, and to create a souvenir of our lives to then send to the other person. And as we went through the year, we gathered data on a variety of topics, like more lighthearted topics, like how much we drank that week, or how much we swore that week, how many rude words we said, which is on screen. Or we experimented with trying to capture the most fleeting of emotions, like tracking a week of our laughter every time we laughed, which is, obviously an almost impossible pursuit. And then we also extended the project beyond only real-time data gathering, moving to weeks where we surveyed parts of our lives for the other, like surveying our collection of books, which is on screen, or our music collections, our wardrobes, and so on. And since gathering this data on your behavior inherently changes it, we also tried what we called performative data tracking, where we tried to gather particular data sets in the hope that this collection would make us change our behavior in a positive way, like trying something new on screen, or smiling at strangers, or being nicer to those around us. And so after 52 weeks, the project finally ended, and culminating in this collection of 104 unique hand-drawn data visualizations. Now, that was obviously a really quick run through the project, but if you want to see all of the postcards close up and in detail, shameless plug, they can be found in book form, and there are some books outside. And it's published by Penguin in the UK and Princeton Architectural Press in the US, alongside a postcard kit that we've created that people can share with a friend to become data pen pals and try the process themselves. Okay, so that's the project, but what did we learn from this year of collecting and drawing our data? Firstly, this year made us believe in the benefits of human-scale data. In this project, we found that the small scale we've been working on has opened the idea of data to a wider audience and made it more approachable. Because Dear Data looked at this domestic and often mundane data that most people can relate to, we've been able to show that data is something that's part of our lives and it isn't necessarily scary or intimidating. Secondly, by gathering, analyzing, and drawing our small data in this manual way, we're highlighting how in learning the basic principles of working with and visualizing data, you don't need fancy programs or incredible data analysis skills to begin. You just really need a pencil and a piece of paper to start, like what you have in front of you. And this manual domestic way that we've been working with really resonates with people, as we've received lots of emails from people starting Dear Data projects of their own or using it as part of their teaching material from school, like primary schools, to university and beyond, to help students learn to collect and present data. And so a wider audience has connected with the project in a way that we never anticipated. And this wider interest has actually compelled us to create a second book that will be published by Princeton Architectural Press in September of this year. So this is the first time that I've really mentioned it. We've just put it to bed. And it's a visual journal that all ages and abilities can use to document their lives through gathering and drawing their own data. Now, besides the insights that I've just mentioned, what aspect of the human experience were we tapping into that made people excited about this small data? So I don't know what my accent sounds like, but it sometimes is a little bit in between, but it's because I'm an American who's spent the last 15 years in the UK, over time beginning to better understand the idiosyncrasies of British culture. And as I've made my home in this newfound country, at some point I stumbled upon a British slang term that piqued my interest, the slang term anorak, now one of my favorite words. And after research online, I can define an anorak as someone interested in the collection of minuscule, arcane, and quite often useless bits of information. And the term derives its name from the type of coat that train spotters stereotypically wear as they collect engine numbers on the edge of a train platform, similar to the chap that you see on screen. And after looking at an anorak's usual output, which is these are notebooks like with notations, jottings, and tallies from a train spotter and a bird spotter, and then looking at the output of my design process, and then looking at the data sets we collected as part of the Dear Data project, well, I mean, it's then that I realized that Georgia and I are officially card-carrying anoraks as well. But as you can see in this snippet of a film, the term anorak is seen as being derogatory and negative in the UK, and it's seen to be nerdy, uncool, and antisocial to be collecting data on things that you're passionate about. But I am surprised that this word is so derogatory when it actually really applies to everyone, because I think that everybody is an anorak, and I think all of us, everyone in this room, we're all acting like data magpies, collecting seemingly useless numbers and storing them away as we move about our day. Many of us in this room know our precise weight, watching every tiny creep up and down the scale, or we might mark places we visited on a wall map at home, or know the exact calorie count of all of our favorite biscuits or cookies or but really I think a lot of the numbers that I've mentioned could be considered as meaningless and as useless as the careful data that an anorak would be collecting. But of course, we'd never chastise a new parent for their obsessive collection of milestones and data traditionally gathered in a baby book, or talk badly of a family that carefully collected heights of everyone who comes to visit their house, or we would never question the careful data collectors with their baseball scorecards out at a baseball game. And these collected numbers and patterns document moments in time, and they can be held onto for years. And so I think, as you can see, many people gather small data and carry it around to get closer to the things that matter to them. But this isn't useless. as the basic act of collecting data on a topic. Any topic means it's important to the author and brings the author closer to subjects they care about. So if you look at the data that you gather as a secret anorak, it's a way of figuring out what's really important to you. And when we look at data from this viewpoint, I think we can all see a view of data that's quite different to that cold and computerized perception of big data I described earlier, where data and data gathering can now be seen as warm, emotional, and part of the human story. And I think this is one reason for the Dear Data project's success, is that I think it does speak to the latent anorak tendencies that many of us have, where we are all data collectors even if we don't realize it. And this latent interest is something I think that we as practitioners should channel when trying to communicate about data to a wider audience. And so I think through Dear Data, being an anorak has started to move from something negative to something more positive. And Georgia and I believe this warmer, in-between direction we're championing is finding success in the design community, as we found validation in the fact that our postcards and the sketchbooks we filled with intermediate drawings were acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So we're very proud of that. To conclude part one, from this project, I believe more than ever that we don't just have to collect and visualize data for, I can't say the word, statistical insight, but now data is a material that can be used in a variety of spaces. And I find the idea of data as this in-between material exciting, where technically the same data set could now be a scientific and analytical material that data scientists work with, and a cultural artifact that artists might respond to, and the souvenir of an experience as collected by an anorak, eliciting completely different responses in these different spaces, and all responses are valid and valuable. And so I believe that everyone who works with data, from designers to artists to data analysts and data visualization specialists, should kind of remember that our idea of what data isn't fixed and steadfast, but is constantly changing and evolving. And I think we just need to be open with how we work with it as a material as we move forward into the future. So thank you. That's the first part of the talk. And so now we're on to part two. So I'll just talk at you a little bit more, and then I'm going to make you do things, which is a really great sort of power. I've never told an audience to do my bidding before. So part two. So with part two, I've talked about my work, but I'm really hoping to answer the following question for you, but very quickly, because I only have an hour, where how exactly does one take the stuff of spreadsheets, the rows, the columns, the numbers, and the categories, and convert it into graphic form, into a data visualization like what you see on screen? So in just 5 to 7 minutes, I'm going to quickly give you a run through of the basics of data visualization, or enough to talk knowledgeably about it at a dinner party, if on the off chance anyone asks about it. And then we'll all create a data visualization together. And so this is the first time I've ever done an on-stage workshop, so we'll see how it goes. So firstly, the first thing that we need to think about is, where can we find data? Well, we can find it everywhere, as it says on screen. Everything can become a data set. And as shown through the wide variety of topics we covered in the Dear Data project, anything in the world can be measured, mapped, quantified, and categorized, and these measurements and numbers become data. And so, that includes everyone in this room. So today, you in the audience and all of us, we are the data set that we'll be working with and we will be visualizing. So we are the data set. How will we visualize this data? Now, I think the most important thing to remember about data visualization is that it involves setting up a system of rules. That's really what it comes down to. And it's the design of these rules and the crafting and fine-tuning of these rules that's the most important part, and the part that I like as a designer. Because really, it's the art and the design is in the rules when it comes to data visualization. So if I try to visualize the process, this is where we're at now. Data is fed through these rules that then that then convert the data into form in a data visualization. So that's the simple process, but we're going to go into a little more detail. So what do I mean by rules? So like, how do we write these, and what do we use to create these rules with? Now, the graphic building blocks that we use to create rules are called visual variables. So this is what all data visualizations are made from. And visual variables is a term that the French cartographer Jacques Bertin came up with in the 1970s. And it's generally sort of agreed that there are 7 main visual variables that we can work with to encode data. So we've got size, so the size of something can communicate data. The tone, whether it's light or dark, can communicate information. The location on a page or on a screen or in a space can communicate data. Texture and pattern, color also communicate data or information. And then also we've got orientation. So, like if you're like a clock, depending on where the hands are pointing, communicates different information to us. And then finally, shape can communicate data as well. So those are our graphic building blocks, but we need to set up rules for how to encode them with data, to map the data from our data set onto the graphic element. So this is what these rules might look like if we wrote them down. So for applying these visual variables, so it might be like the higher the amount, the larger the circle will be, or the lower the value, the darker the color. If it's this type of data, I'll color it green, and if it's that type of data, I'll color it pink. If it's this type of data, I will represent it with a square, and if it's that type of data, I'll represent it with a circle. And so, a data visualization designer might not be writing these rules down, but these are the rules that are going on in their mind as they're creating. And just to show you how that works in practice, I'll use charts that you're all used to, probably. It's in every spreadsheet program. The pie chart, the line chart, and the bar chart. And these are all invented by William Playfair like 200 years ago. So visualization is definitely not new. So example for the pie chart, size, the size of the pie's wedge is the visual variable that they're really using here. And in his line chart, you're using like the location of the line on the page, the color of the line, and then the direction or orientation of the line up and down. Those are the variables in there. And then for this bar chart at the end, the size and the length of the bar is the key variable we're working with. So we're adding to our recipe, our process. So data is then fed through rules of, that then determine how that data is mapped onto our graphic building blocks, our visual variables, and then out comes the data viz. But we have one more ingredient to add to this recipe, and that is visual perception, our human ability to make sense of all the visual information that surrounds us, to understand the world through what we see. And this is a subconscious and a natural skill. We don't realize when we're using these abilities, particularly when we're using our sense of visual perception on important tasks, like determining which one of those pieces of cake is the biggest. So does anyone left or right? Which do you think? Oh, it's split. OK. It's actually left. But this is a critical skill that we need to know to get the biggest piece of cake. It's very important. You should be able to pick it out. Anyway, so the rules of thumb we use to make sense of our world are called Gestalt principles. And so this is just an example of some of these laws. And so instead of using it to make sense of the world, we use these rules of thumb to, and apply them to the graphic elements we see on screen or on a page. So just to quickly pull out a couple of these, one rule of thumb we all subconsciously know when we make sense of the world is objects that are connected are likely related. So when we see a bunch of grapes, we assume that they're all grapes. We don't assume that one is a cherry, like they are all connected, so they're the same thing. And again, on the topic of food, Objects, this is another law we use to make sense of the world, where we assume the objects in the same container are likely related. So a packet of M&Ms, we will assume it's all M&Ms in there and not Skittles. And in the Skittles, it's all Skittles and not M&Ms. So breaking it down again, well, kind of adding to our process, we've got data that we make rules up for how we map them into visual variables, always thinking, while we do that, about visual perception. So ensuring that the choices we make work with our natural innate ability to make sense of the world instead of fighting against it. Because when it fights against it, it makes it really hard to read the visualization. And out comes a data viz at the end. So whew, that's like the quick run through. And now if we could have the lights up, please. Ooh, thank you very much. And so this is the bit where you have to do something. There's so many people in the audience. That's really exciting. Where I want you to draw your data selfie. So instead of taking photos of ourselves, taking our selfie, what we're going to do today is represent ourselves through data. So you all have a sheet of paper, and you've got a marker based on your answer to a question. And so this is going to be really easy. It's like, yeah, so if you don't know how to draw, it's totally fine. It's very, very simple. And so because we're the data set, I will have you answer questions, or basically we'll take data from you, and then depending on your answers to these questions, you'll draw, that will determine what you draw on your sheet of paper. So again, nothing too intimidating. So the first data that we've collected already is where were you born? So you should, if you were born in Illinois, you have a black pen. Is that right? Everyone's got their black pen. OK. And if you were born elsewhere, you've got your red pen. And so already we're using the color visual variable in our visualization. So we've got that covered. And so next, this is the next data that we're going to draw. So which best describes you? So if you're an extrovert, if you're really gregarious and outgoing, draw a big circle on your sheet of paper. And then if you're, huh? Well, I think, yeah. Yeah. I don't know how to respond to that, but that, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But I don't want to rein you in, but do try to put it on the paper. So yeah, if you're an extrovert, big, and then if you're an introvert, if you're more like shy or like a little bit quieter, then maybe make one that's kind of, I don't know, a third high, or as small as you want, that's fine. So okay, has everyone drawn a circle? I don't want to put a lot of pressure on you. All right. I will assume that everyone's drawn a circle. So now we're going to add, so that is using the size visual variable. So we've used 2 visual variables so far. And now we're going to use the texture visual variable, where you've got to make a decision, and everyone's got an opinion on this. So are you on team dog or team cat? So you've got to pick one. This is very contentious. So if you think dogs are the best, around your circle, draw lots of like petals, because I thought dogs are like really happy, friendly things that are kind of sunshiny. And then if you're on team cat, if you think cats are the best, draw lots of like prickly spikes around the outside, because I thought that would best suit the how cats are. Okay, I still see a few people drawing, and I'll be grading you on this after, so make sure it's. Hey, remember, some of us are family. Yeah. Okay, how are we doing? Have we done it? All right, great. So the next bit is not data, but if you're doing a data selfie, you need some eyes on your face. So just draw 2 eyes on the top. Okay. All right, so we've got eyes. So the next bit of data, we're going to use the orientation visual variable. So for you, your response, the glass, is the glass half full for you? So draw a happy face. And then if the glass is half empty, you know, we're changing the orientation. We're flipping it upside down, and we're drawing a frowny face. So half full or half empty. Are you an optimist? Or are you a pessimist? Okay. And I think most of us are good to go. Yeah. Now there's just one more. It's very simple visualization, very simple set of rules. And we're using the location visual variable. So obviously, the best people in the world, and are they left-handed? If you're left-handed, so draw a line on the left-hand side of the page. Or if the best people in the world are right-handed, then draw a line on the right-hand side of the page. Okay. So that is you've all made a data visualization, so congratulations. You've taken your data and you've used a set of rules to convert it into visual variables and then draw it onto the page. So this is obviously a very, very simple visualization. And say if we had time, we could take all of our drawings and then we could stick them all up on a wall and then have a look at them and take a step back and begin to assess and look for patterns within our data set. But since you're all sitting there, I need a little bit of help from you. So firstly, if you could just hold yours up. This is one that I made earlier and just sort of showed can someone take oh, there's a photo. That's good. Please, can I have this? I didn't really think about it. It looks great. So yeah, just maybe show yours around and so everyone can see what our audience visualization looks like. Although, because we're all sort of scattered, are you ambidextrous? You didn't want to make an assessment on the best people? Okay. All right. I'm left-handed, so I obviously think the best people are left-handed. But okay, so what can we discover about our audience? So, I mean, you've all shown your drawings, and I love how with every data set, there's always a few outliers and a few things that don't quite fit. So I see all these people bending the rules and adding sunglasses and doing things like that. But I just want people to sort of raise it up. So let's begin to assess our data set and look for patterns. So first, I guess you really notice color. So how many of you are from Illinois? Raise your drawing up in the air. Or were born in Illinois. And then how many of you were born elsewhere? Oh my God. Did we have enough? Woo, me too. Okay, that's interesting. I don't know. For some reason, I thought it would be more Illinois. Okay, so the next one was, how many, raise your drawing up if you think that you're an extrovert, or you? Okay. And, oh, your circle fits. Okay, that's, yeah. And then if you're an introvert, I couldn't really answer this. I'm really shy. I find it really hard to approach people. I know I give talks, but maybe I should have made it bigger. Anyway, so mine's little as well. I know that doesn't make sense. And okay, so next, this is the really critical question. If you're team dog, raise yours up. Okay, well, if you're team cat, raise yours up. I think there's probably more dogs, aren't there? All right, so just out of curiosity, are you team dog and, wait, no, I'll ask the question next. So who believes that the glass is half full? Oh, wow, most people are optimistic. So out of the people who think the glass is half full, how many of you are team dog? That's interesting. Okay, then how many pessimists are there? And how many of the pessimists are Team Cat? All right, now, I'm not a statistician, but I just was curious. All right, so we're looking for different patterns within our data set. And then the final one is, who are the best people? Left-handers or right-handers? So right-handers and left-handers. Obviously, I do this every single time I teach a workshop. I always see how many left-handers there are, because we are the best, anyway. So I know, like, this is it's kind of a strange way of visualizing data, but it is actually grounded in data visualization theory. So yeah, thank you so much for being my data set and then drawing your data. And it actually references another visualization method called the Chernoff face. And this was invented by Hermann Chernoff, I'm probably pronouncing his surname wrong, in 1973, where he created this because he felt he wanted to harness our ability as humans to easily recognize small variations and kind of, I guess, micro expressions in faces that we all use this to tell people apart and tell their emotions. And so he's harnessing this capability for the sake of data, so in the hopes that people would be able to understand different, like kind of subtle differences between data sets. So that's it. And now I have 10 minutes for questions. So thank you so much for taking part.
If you have a question, raise your hand and I can come to you. We've got one right here.
Thank you so much. That was really great. It gave me some new perspective on a few things. But I have a quick question for you. You primarily have been working with paper and flat. So in the 7 visual variables, I was thinking about, there's several others that can come into play, particularly with electronics now, right? So things like motion, which are also there, or time, whether something is here now or later or was here or not. So how do you, how would you, or how do you think of those, or have you thought of those, or would that be an interesting thing to explore?
Yeah, no, I definitely think I suppose the 7 visual variables are like the core that you normally teach with, but I think that anything can become a variable that you can encode with data. And that's what I think is really interesting, like you can make an installation that uses weight, and depending on how much things weigh, you would experience data in a different way, or people do data sonification, or there's a data visualization specialist, Moritz Stefaner, who will, he does a lot of workshops called Data Cuisine, where different people where these workshops are held in different parts of the world will use data relating to where they're at and work with a chef to create dishes where the taste and the sweetness and the texture all represent data as well. So yeah, I think that is definitely, that's probably what I find. Extending past those 7 is what I find interesting as a designer, and sort of experimenting with that. Yeah.
Got one right here.
You mentioned earlier about you had an idea you might need to go to coders or modelers for that, but I feel like all the examples we saw were more hand-done. Do you have an example of something that you took into coders to have to design, or?
Yeah. So I don't have any on. So ages ago, I worked on an app for the British National Treasure. I don't know, what does he do? Stephen Fry? Do you know who Stephen Fry is? Yeah, and it was for his second autobiography. And so Penguin made an app, and I created this interface where it visualized all of his autobiography into small sections of text coded by theme, so that way someone could read the text in a non-linear way. And so I created this interface that effectively visualized all of color-coded and showed relationships between the text that someone could navigate through and read all of the book, all of the times he talked about working with Hugh Laurie or studying at Cambridge or what have you. And so then I would create all of the rules and then give it to a developer and then kind of work in tandem with them to refine further once it was being coded. So yeah, no, and then, or like another example is that I'm working on a hospital art commission in the UK where it's artwork that's going across 190 hospital rooms. So they're quite big pieces, and each one of them is unique. And so then I'm working with a developer to automate the process. But it's a very back and forth. So I'll sketch, and then I'll hand over. Oh, I'll let you choose.
We have our last question back here. But if you still have questions, I believe Stefanie will be signing books out in the lobby afterwards.
Hello.
Hi. I was wondering if you could describe the impression that you got of your co-author through the postcards, and then whether your non-postcard interactions have kind of been reinforced by or differed from that?
Well, it's been the first impression, and I think Georgia would agree with me, is that she definitely is like more organized and more like, she's really into like really complexity, and she is really on the ball with everything, and I'm always struggling to keep up, and I'm a procrastinator. And so even just visually, I would learn a lot about her because her postcards are so intensively rich and complex, and she's able to cram so much information from her week in a way that I would never really be able to do myself. So that is the first impression. And just like, yeah, you can tell a lot about her personality through what she chose to collect. She basically collected like 3 times as much data as me. But then also, I think one thing that we always talk about is how like the data was never the be-all and end-all of us as people. So we would get the postcards, and then it was a really good reminder that data is a starting point for conversation instead of this ultimate end and like truth. So we would get the data, we would read our postcards, and then start to message and start to communicate and ask questions and dig deeper. And so it was often in that conversation that started from it where we really began to learn more about each other. Thank you.